I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in the war, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Today, I'm going to talk about some of those less traveled roads that I took, and how my journey on those roads did make all the difference. Decades ago, just after I had turned 14, I was visiting a friend. It was in Butler, Pennsylvania, on a clear and a chilly Sunday afternoon. Suddenly, his brother burst in. "We are at war," he said. "They just bombed Pearl Harbor." Even as a young teenager, I had closely followed the war's development. My memory of that moment is sharp. It was one of great relief. We were finally in the war. Now we would stand up to the evil Nazis invading Europe and the Japanese militarists plundering China. Some jingoists proclaimed, "Well, we will defeat Japan in 2 weeks." But most knew that it would be a long and a hard fight. And after the losses at Pearl Harbor, that was all too clear. From my 14-year-old perspective, I secretly feared that the war would end too soon, before I was old enough to join up. And that was just what happened. While I was still 17, it was over. Nevertheless, after 3 semesters at Carnegie Tech, I did turn 18 and enlisted in the Army. They trained me in mapping and shipped me off to the Army of Occupation in Japan. I was stunned when I first saw it, the vast ruins that once had been the great city of Tokyo. Nothing had prepared me for such utter devastation that was wrought by massive waves of firebombing rained down by American bomber attacks. It was a transforming experience. In many ways, I grew up from it. Soon after, I was sent to the island of Okinawa, site of the last great battle of World War II. More than 200,000 people, soldiers and civilians, perished there. In the port of Naha, its capital, not a single building was left standing. The island was a moonscape, denuded of trees and vegetation, the smell of death still lingering. The War of Japan had ended with the detonation of atomic bombs on 2 other great cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Pictures of those cities reminded me of the wasteland of Tokyo and Naha. But there was one huge difference. It had taken multiple strikes by thousands of bombers and tens of thousands of high-explosive bombs to lay waste to Tokyo. The same had been done to Hiroshima and then to Nagasaki with just one plane and just one bomb. Just one bomb. The unleashing of this colossal force indelibly shaped my life in ways that I have now come to see more clearly. It impressed on me that our world faces an enormous and an unprecedented danger, a danger beyond the ruin of vast cities, a danger no less than the end of civilization. That was my first great lesson of the nuclear age. When it comes to weapons of war, our new and unimaginable capacity to inflict horror and ruin had changed everything. Everything. In June of 1947, I completed my Army tour and returned home. The images of destruction still haunted me. But at 20, I was eager to begin building my own life. And before that year had ended, I had married my high school sweetheart, Lee Green. We finished our respective school year studies and headed west. I had returned from Japan by way of San Francisco, and I was struck by its beauty and a sense that everything was new and anything was possible. So with my GI Bill in hand, I transferred to Stanford University. And in the summer of 1948, Lee and I drove to California. Over the next few years, the pace of our married life quickened. We had our first two children, David and Bill. Lee reluctantly deferred her education to raise them. I completed my bachelor's and my master's degree in mathematics, and then my GI Bill ran out. But I wanted to earn a doctorate, to be a math professor, and Penn State made me an offer I couldn't refuse, an offer that allowed me to teach and to pursue my PhD. So in 1951, we returned to Pennsylvania, and soon twin daughters, Rebecca and Robin, arrived. We were delighted but woefully short of income to support a family of 6. Lee cleaned our pediatrician's office in return for our children's medical care. And I took an additional part-time job at a local defense company. While I was still in graduate school, the world was changing in incredibly dangerous ways. The Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. North Korea invaded South Korea. The United States tested a hydrogen bomb, a thermonuclear bomb, followed a few years later by the Soviets. The Cold War was on. The nuclear arms race began in earnest. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945 was 1,000 times more powerful than the largest high-explosive bomb. The hydrogen bomb was yet another 1,000 times more destructive than the one dropped on Hiroshima. Thus, in just 10 years, the two most powerful nations on Earth had increased their destructive power by 1,000 times 1,000, an astounding million times greater than before, in just 10 years. And then we began racing to see who could build the most of these bombs. In the face of those fearsome developments, I decided to enter the defense electronics industry instead of academia. Early in 1954, having completed my PhD studies, Lee and I piled our 4 kids into the car and drove back to California. And there, just south of Stanford, in Mountain View, I took my first job at Sylvania's Electronic Defense Laboratory, where I became deeply involved in programs that shaped my career and began to change my thinking about the deadly legacy of nuclear weapons. By the mid-1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union were actively seeking to build intercontinental ballistic missiles to deliver in 30 minutes a thermonuclear warhead pinpointed to a target halfway around the world. Unstoppable, like a bullet shot from a gun. Now there would be many such nuclear bullets aimed simultaneously at one another, around the clock, every day, ready to strike in a scope and a scale that nothing in all of history could rival, for its suddenness, its brutal avalanche of finality. The question we were looking at our laboratory was, could we defend ourselves from such an attack? One of our early projects at Sylvania was what was called electronic countermeasures, to jam the signal that guided an attacking Soviet missile, diverting the warhead from its intended American target. I was put to work assessing the potential reduction in damage that would result from effectively disrupting these signals in an attack by a fleet of nuclear-tipped missiles. And I concluded, beyond a reasonable doubt, that we could reduce fatalities by about 2/3. So instead of 75 million dead, only 25 million would die. Only 25 million. And that was before the longer-term effects from the radiation and the wounds killed millions more. So that was my second great lesson of the nuclear age. There is no acceptable defense against the destructive power of nuclear weapons. It seemed obvious to me even then, but I have observed and still observe governments basing their actions on the belief that they can build a defense capable enough to defeat a large-scale nuclear attack. But I came to know that the only real defense against these weapons is to prevent their use. During the years I worked at this laboratory, Lee and I were blessed with the arrival of our final, at last child, Mark, and our family was complete. Besides my work at the laboratory, I served as an unpaid technical advisor to U.S. government agencies. And on a beautiful day in 1962, I took a call from the Science and Technology Director of CIA. He asked me to fly to Washington that night. He needed help with an urgent problem. I was stunned when he showed me the pictures. There, just 90 miles from the United States, Soviet missiles were being deployed. The Cuban Missile Crisis, yet unknown to the public, was rapidly unfolding. For the next 8 days, from early afternoon to late into the night, I helped analyze the data that our reconnaissance aircraft collected each morning to make a report to President Kennedy, delivered first thing the following day by the director of CIA. And I listened to President Kennedy's speech to the American people and his stark warning. He said,
"It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union."
I understood exactly what a full retaliatory response meant. I called home before leaving the hotel each afternoon to talk to Lee and the children. She and I spoke of our everyday lives, of how much we missed one another, but we both understood the gravity of the situation. Each day that I went into that analysis center, I really thought would be our last day on Earth. And I still believe that the world avoided a nuclear holocaust as much by good luck as by good management. So my third important lesson was that despite our best efforts, I now understood that a nuclear war could occur by tragic miscalculation. And I knew that such a war would destroy our civilization. By 1978, I had left private industry and been confirmed as the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Now I was essentially the Chief Technology Officer for our armed forces. One night I was awakened by a call at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was the watch officer at the North American Aerospace Defense Command. The general got right to the point. He told me that his computers were showing 200 missiles on the way from the Soviet Union to the United States. That call is still as vivid as if it had happened last night. It was a false alarm, of course, but for a few heartbeats, I believed that my worst nightmare had come true. I was not able that evening to help the general determine what had gone wrong. In fact, it took several days to determine that a careless operator had left a training program installed in the warning system's computer. It was human error. And that would be my fourth great lesson. No matter how detailed our plans, no matter what precautions we take, a nuclear war could start by accident. And that accident would end our world as we know it. On February the 3rd, 1994, I was sworn in as the 19th Secretary of Defense for the United States. The Cold War was now over. And with the lessons that had been impressed on me, my highest priority as Secretary was dismantling the deadly nuclear legacy of the Cold War in the former Soviet Union and here in the United States. During my term in office, we actually dismantled about 8,000 nuclear weapons. And we helped 3 new former Soviet republics, the Ukraine, then the 3rd greatest nuclear power in the world, Kazakhstan and Belarus, all 3 to go entirely non-nuclear. There's a place in the Ukraine called Pervomaisk. It was once the largest and most modern Soviet ICBM site. It once had 700 nuclear warheads, all aimed at targets in the United States. I made 4 trips there. First, to observe the warheads being removed. Second, to observe the missiles being scrapped. Third, to witness the silos being blown up. And on my 4th trip, I joined the Minister of Defense of Russia and the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and together we planted sunflowers in an open field where had once been the most terrible weapons ever devised by mankind. So reducing the danger of nuclear weapons is not a fantasy. It has been done. And the world made immeasurably safer for it. So my 5th and happiest lesson was, with enlightened U.S. leadership, it is possible to dramatically reduce these weapons and the dangers that they pose. But it will take leadership, courage, and sustained effort, including international cooperation. Several tens of thousands of nuclear weapons still remain in the United States and in Russia. And in places where there were none, new ones are being built or contemplated. Albert Einstein famously said, "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything, save our modes of thinking. We thus drift toward unparalleled catastrophe. Everything has changed except the way we think." Influenced powerfully by the experiences I have described, my thinking did change, slowly but inexorably. Until recently, my speeches and writing have been for elite specialists in the realm of national security. Clearly, that is not working. In the old world capital of Prague, President Obama, just 3 months after he took office, said that the United States would seek the peace and security of the world without nuclear weapons. I was thrilled when I heard that speech. And for a few years, there were spurts of positive activity and some tangible results. But in recent years, there's been a slowdown. And now, the last year or two, even a reversal of progress. The Senate did confirm several years ago a very modest New START treaty with Russia, but only after a bitter fight and a close vote. The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, an important treaty, has not been taken to the Senate for ratification for fear it will be defeated. And there has been no follow-on to New START. North Korea and Iran are moving towards building nuclear arsenals. Russia and China have started new nuclear programs, and the United States is considering following suit. It is imperative that we reverse this trend, but it will be very difficult. Congress shows no signs of support for further initiatives. They are disinterested because their constituents, you and I, the people in this room, our friends and families, our communities, are on the whole disinterested. It is all too easy to ignore this peril. The Cold War seems like ancient history now, and existential nuclear dangers seemingly ended with it. It is true that we no longer face an all-out nuclear attack by a large and a distant nation-state. That most of us understand. But we still face immense nuclear dangers, which most of us do not understand. For we are now beset by two new nuclear nightmares, to which there seems a public hush. First and foremost is the risk of terrorist attacks on our cities by terrorists using improvised nuclear devices. We know that Al-Qaeda has sought and vowed to use them. If they succeed, it would be the worst single catastrophe in all of our history. Casualties 100 times greater than 9/11, and an unprecedented disruption to our way of life, economically, socially, politically. Fear and reaction could put an end to the freedoms we now enjoy. So far, all that prevents this is the inability of a determined terrorist group to get their hands on the necessary fissile material. The second nuclear nightmare awaiting us is a regional nuclear war. 4 times in the last 4 years, I have met with former high officials of Pakistan and India. At the last such meeting, a former Pakistani general said, when the next Mumbai-like attack occurs in India, he expects India will respond militarily with a punitive incursion into Pakistan. He predicted that the Pakistani army would be routed and in desperation use so-called tactical nuclear weapons. If that happens, I have little doubt that India will respond with nuclear weapons. A regional nuclear war will then be on with no telling how long it will last or how far it will extend to other nations. So the dangers from nuclear weapons today are not theoretical. They are real and they are grave. In order for the world to make real progress reducing nuclear dangers, the United States must lead. And we will not lead until we understand the importance of doing so, until we understand that nuclear weapons no longer provide for our security as they once did, that today they are endangering our security. President Kennedy, speaking on the difficulties of keeping the Cold War from turning into a nuclear war, said, "Too many of us think it is impossible, but that is a dangerous and a defeatist belief. It leads to the conclusion the war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control." And then he went on to say, we need not accept that conclusion. Our problems are man-made, and therefore they can be solved by man. And so it is today. We need not accept the view that we are gripped with forces we cannot control. that nuclear weapons will inevitably be used. I hope and I trust that you will not accept that view, that you, along with many others, and especially those still young, will work for a world where nuclear weapons are never used again. Before a nightmare visits forever on generations to come, and this planet that will be theirs, before forever changes, because it ought to be done. And if the citizens of the United States make clear to their leaders that is what they want, it might well be so. So for the balance of my career, I will devote my life to this mission impossible. I will not accept that it cannot be done. I shall do everything I can to ensure nuclear weapons will never again be used, because I believe time is not on our side, and because, having helped to build a nuclear arsenal, I know better than most how to dismantle it. And I believe that I have a special responsibility to do so. And in that spirit, I will now end my talk with the last stanza of another great poem by Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Thank you.